Hello, everyone. My name is Tanner Lawson,
My name's Alex Woodman.
and we're doing our project on Runaways and Human Bondage using Chapter 4 of Life in Early Philadelphia.
Century America was a period full of oppression for a variety of persons. The rapid migration of immigrants looking to escape persecution or an oppressive governmental system in the Old World brought an influx of transients into the colonies, while countless poverty-stricken Americans sought work in any form they could attain it. People of varying ethnicities who were enslaved or in an indentured apprenticeship, paying off some debt owed, sought to escape the bonds and chains impeding on their freedom. However, this time period brought with it certain obstacles that made it difficult to escape such oppressive circumstances. In Chapter 4 of Life in Early Philadelphia, we are able to examine advertisements posted in newspapers that are offering rewards for the return of slaves, indentured servants, apprentices, or any other person confined in human bonds. In looking at these documents, we are better able to understand the plight endured by those looking to gain their freedom from an oppressive system. Three of these groups, slaves, indentured servants, and apprentices, had all different experiences in their time of oppression. Using the slave advertisements from life in early Philadelphia, you can start to put together what someone may have endured. Enslaved and free African Americans in the early Revolutionary period experienced possibly the most severe forms of human bondage. However, in Pennsylvania, the plight of enslaved persons was slightly different. The state legislature had passed a statute that effectively guaranteed the gradual end to slavery, but this gradual end was very slow indeed. The Legislative Act created the terms in the state of Pennsylvania that children born to slaves after March 1st, 1780, would gain their freedom after serving their mother's master as an indentured servant until their 28th birthday, if they were male, or until their 21st birthday, if they were female. The status of all slaves born before that date remained unaltered, or in other words, they would never be freed by this particular legislative act. Even so, this statute offered some sort of hope for the African American community in Philadelphia, encouraging this community to help runaways and absconders in any way possible. Slaves were required to carry a pass on their person at all times when leaving the property of their owner, and faced harsh physical punishment if found outside a 10-mile perimeter without a pass. To discourage people from helping these absconders, stiff penalties and fines were imposed, and any free African American caught aiding a runaway and could not pay the fine would be liable to be sold back into servitude. For example, in advertisement 48, the article advertises the capture of a male African American who claimed to be a free man. However, the judgment of the jail where he was kept was that he was most likely a runaway. Therefore, he was imprisoned until his master would come forward or sold at auction back into servitude, regardless of whether he was a free man or not. Examples such as this show the magnitude of the oppression hanging over African Americans at this time, and what a struggle escaping this oppression would be.
The lives of indentured servants seem to be far less oppressive than the lives of enslaved African Americans. Yet still these people face the confines of human bonds. Most were immigrants coming to the New World to escape persecution or oppression in other parts of the world. These immigrants would sign an agreement called an indenture, and according to this agreement, an immigrant labored as a servant for a designated master for a number of years, normally 3 or 4, in return for the cost of the Atlantic voyage, daily maintenance, and perhaps freedom dues. In the advertisements provided, the life of an indentured servant did not seem horribly oppressed. In advertisement 54, the runaway described had a very reasonable clothing and was given a pass of 4 days, meaning he was given a fair amount of freedom outside of his master. There was little in the reading that had given insight on how the apprentices' experience were. One ad numbered 87 was about a young apprentice by the name of John Tanner who had ran away from his master. In the description, the master had described John wearing a suitable outfit consisting of pants, shoes, jacket, and the like. But he had also taken with him extra changes of clothes. And although we can't get an exact sense of what John had endured under his master, we can still tell he was well off enough to be clothed properly and was lucky to have multiple outfits to take with him. There is evidence out there that some African American slaves wouldn't even have a pair of shoes on them at any time. So, what did these people in bondage think of the revolutionary events that were happening around them? It is hard to speculate exactly what people in bondage had thought of the events during that time. Many could have ran away with the hope that if they made it to society, they would be considered free. As the colonists had just won their freedom from England, and these people in servitude could have seen themselves as a colonist who had just won their own freedom, but were still in bondage. This hope that they may be free had pushed them to run away, but unfortunately a majority of society had still seen them as inferior. Thus, it is important that we look at the historical biases associated with some of these documents, like the runaway advertisements.
A primary concern in any historical analyses is the possibility of biases clouding the accuracy of the historical record. When examining the advertisements in Chapter 4 of Life in Early Philadelphia, it is important to understand that in the time period being discussed, the only historical records being kept for the most part were being written by the oppressors rather than the oppressed. As the saying goes, history is written by the victor, and in this period, those confined in bondage were not in a position of victory. This one-sided viewpoint makes it difficult to fully understand the experiences and feelings of an enslaved or oppressed person. When discussing the biases of these advertisements, it is also important that you look at the costs associated with some of these people. How much could these people in power actually care about those under their care if there was a price to be put on them? Even if the masters were fair in their treatment, they still see themselves as superior. There is one advertisement which I found very interesting that may be able to add some insight to this topic. Ad 73 had an odd reason of why this master had wanted his servant back. It states, "Whoever takes up said lad and secures him in Gloucester jail at Woodbury, so that the subscriber may have an opportunity to dispose of him." This man felt so much hatred towards his runaway that he was willing to pay someone $20 just to kill his former slave. That is equal to just a little over $575 today. This shows how biased documents like these ads can be, and it is important as historians to try and seek out personal accounts of runaways to better understand what it was like.
I'll just read off two examples of advertisements from life in early Philadelphia to give you more insight on the topic of runaways and human bondage. Advertisement 61 in the book is a $20 reward, and it is dated on May 25th, 1796. And it states, "Ran away last evening from the subscriber, an indented German servant aged about 32 years named Johannes Gunen, about 5 feet 6 or 7 inches high, has gray eyes, a fresh-colored face, short, dark brown hair. He speaks little English, though talkative if indulged. He says he can speak French and understands it well. Low Dutch is his native tongue. He took with him a variety of clothes, is a farmer brought up, says he was in the French army sometime, and then set sail to America from Amsterdam. It is supposed he wears a short white homespun coat, a cocked hat flopped down before, corduroy ribbed breeches, and a white jacket. Whoever secures said servant in any jail so that his master may get him again shall have the above reward, paid by the subscriber in the township of Tredyffrin, county of Chester, and state of Pennsylvania. Water leave."
Here is another advertisement dated January 14th, 1795. $4 reward. Ran away from the subscriber on Thursday the 25th of December, living in Lower Salford Township, Montgomery County. A Negro man named Joe, about 5 feet 5 inches high, was 23 years of age last May. Walks lame, has a piece of his little finger cut off. Had on and took with him a new mixture linsey coat and under jacket of the same, a striped jacket of linen, blue and white stripes, 2 pair of trousers, a pair of yellow linsey and a pair of striped casimir, 2 pairs of stockings, 1 pair of pale blue yarn, the other black woolen yarn, a new pair of shoes, a new high-crowned hat bound with black tape. Whoever takes up said Negro and secures him in any jail, so that his master may get him again, shall have the above reward, and reasonable charges if brought home, paid by January 8th, 1795.
To go with the ads from life in early Philadelphia, we had also looked at some writings from one of our founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin. He was a slaveholder in his early years, but around the mid-18th century, his stance had changed, and he became one of the most important abolitionists of his time. Around the time of the Revolution, however, he had argued greatly about how even the free colonists were in danger of becoming slaves themselves, and you can see his view in the quote shown on the slide. But even after the war, he had still seen slavery in different forms, and even compared the service of an enlisted man in the military to slavery. In another letter he had written to Benjamin Vaughan in 1785, Franklin had stated, "A Negro slave in our colonies, being commanded by his master to rob or murder a neighbor, or do any other immoral act, may refuse, and the magistrate will protect him in his refusal." The slavery, then, of a soldier is worse than that of a Negro. A conscientious officer, if not restrained by the apprehension of its being imputed to another cause, may indeed resign, rather than be employed in an unjust war. But the private men are slaves for life, and they are perhaps incapable of judging for themselves. Here Franklin was not wrong in saying this, as there were instances in which slaves would be able to eventually gain their freedom by loyalty or a change in heart from their master, much like that of George Washington, in which he had stated in his will that all slaves of his were to be freed after his death. An enlisted man, however, was to stay in service of the military until his death or discharged, unless you were an officer who could resign your service. Although Franklin had written much about the enslavement of free colonists, he had still fought for the numerous African slaves who were in bondage. In fact, he was the president of the Pennsylvania Abolition Society, in which he had written a letter to U.S. Congress in 1790 calling for the freedom of slaves. One quote from this letter had said, "Mankind are all formed by the same Almighty Being, alike objects of His care, and equally designed for the enjoyment of happiness the Christian religion teaches us to believe, and the political creed of America fully coincides with the position." Here he is arguing from a religious perspective that God had created us all in His vision, and so we should all be able to enjoy the freedoms of America, as even the ideals of the government had shared the same position as him. In this letter, he had also said that the memorialists of Congress should be bound to try and loosen the bands of slavery and promote a general enjoyment of the blessing of freedom. Benjamin Franklin had not only fought for our freedom as a country, but also the freedom of all people who occupy the newly free land.
Week's discussion, here are some questions for you guys to think about. Human bondage was such an integral part of the culture of Revolutionary era America. So, how did these oppressive forms of servitude shape societal norms today? And how did their bondage shape these individuals' views on the revolutionary climate around them? These are some important questions to think about when comprehending the plight that these oppressed people endured during this period.
And that wraps up our presentation for today. I just want to thank you all for taking the time and watching the entire presentation. And we're looking forward to reading some of your discussion responses to our questions this week. Have a great rest of your day.